Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and the Salesology Prospecting Method. I am also known as the queen of cold calling. And today, our very special guest is Sean Campbell. He is the co-founder and CEO of Cascade Insight. And Sean's company focuses on B2B market research. And Sean trains sales teams. He turns doers into sellers to achieve exceptional performance, and he balances marketing and sales efforts so that they're mutually supportive. I'm going to have to ask Sean about that. And he also explains the age of narrow and why it helps consulting firms. Sean has been working remotely with clients and managing remote teams since 1999, and he can share some tips and things to avoid in this area. And I definitely want to ask him about that as well. So welcome, Sean.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Much appreciated.
Yeah. So before we jump into all the questions that I have for you today, what's the backstory? How did you become the co-founder and CEO of Cascade Insight?
Well, not sure exactly. No, I mean, that's not true. I definitely wasn't a business student. I thought they were a little strange getting up at 7 a.m. to go for accounting classes. And I was a communication major. Originally thought I wanted to do radio and television, to do documentaries. I might be clear. Nothing against doing the evening news, but that really wasn't what I wanted to do. I was interested in like being a documentary filmmaker or something like that. And anyway, long story short, I ended up in my master's degree doing a lot of teaching. And I really fell in love with that. Always thought being a college professor also was another thing I might be kind of interested in. But what happened is what entered in my orbit was a lovely woman I'm still married to, of course. And I kind of thought, well, it's kind of a poor life in terms of dollars and cents to go through graduate school and become a college professor. So maybe I should get a job first. And my job was actually teaching computers, networking. It's funny, it dates me just by that. When there was an era when you used to say, I taught computers, right? You don't really do that anymore, right? But in the, mid 90s or so, late 90s, that was a phrase that was used. And I'm 52 now for listeners because you can't see necessarily the video, but I ended up on a trajectory where I ended up learning a lot more about networking and databases and programming, and became a certified, network engineer and database developer and programmer. And anyway, long story short, I ended up deciding to branch out on my own as an independent trainer, along with two other guys. And we founded our first company. And that organization eventually grew and was sold circa 2006. And that company had its own journey of its sense. So our two major accounts were Microsoft and Intel. I used to say, I didn't start on the small end of the pool. My first effort of learning how to sell was selling Microsoft back when they had a level of dominance that's hard to imagine. I mean, in the early aughts, when I decided to start selling Microsoft on us, this is an era where they had 97% of computing. Imagine if all phones, 97% of them were iPhones. I mean, that would just be so strange. We don't really have anything like that anymore, right? And so they were just a behemoth. They were dominant, and hence they were an interesting animal to try to sell and get to know. But I learned a lot through the process. And then the second account we ended up with was Intel. So, I ended up dealing with very large enterprise accounts from the very, very beginning. And that was, I would say that almost was universally good. There was a lot I learned. I mean, a ton I learned that I don't think I would have ever learned if I started sales on the other side, like smaller accounts and whatever. And anyway, so we sold that company and then we started Cascade with me and one of my original business partners. And long story short, that's been a going concern now for about 16 years. I'm actually just the sole owner of Cascade. Some time ago, my business partner decided to exit, just didn't necessarily want to be a business partner anymore in terms of like, the life of owning a business, and he's gone off to do other things. And and so it's been a great journey. But if you had told me I would own a business for, it's almost nearly 25 years now, when I was in college, I would have thought that would have been inconceivable, honestly. And the connection I've come to realize to tie this all together is, at least my orientation with having a business and having clients is, I am basically just all about educating them. And I know that's said a lot, but I don't know if it's necessarily actually followed through that much. And to the point that I've sometimes said to people, I'm basically like psychologically incapable of learning something and not wanting to turn around and teach somebody it. Not in like I know it and you don't way, but just more like, this is really cool. I would like you to have the same skill. And it kind of pervades my whole life. Like, I've got a fishing as a hobby and I've got skiing as a hobby. And I'm regularly like, hey, friend of my son, let's teach you how to ski or teach you how to fish, or, let me volunteer to do teaching in the church or whatever it is. I mean, it's just kind of how I'm wired. And what I didn't know when I started down the path of owning a business, particularly in services, I guess, is how much of the job was mentoring and education if your orientation was right. I mean, I really had no idea. And then oddly enough, what do I own? I own a company that does research predominantly for tech sector companies. So even that aspect of professorial life where you're doing research was also included. Little did I know. So it's kind of interesting how it played out. I still love teaching. If somebody out there wants somebody to show up as a guest speaker in a college, I'm always the first one to sign up and say, I'll be there. I taught in an MBA program for a few years. I loved it. Only stopped because my kids just were getting older and needed more time. But that's basically my journey. But it's all really centers on education and teaching. I mean, I haven't ever really been able to get away from it, nor do I really want to.
So tell us a little bit about Cascade Insights. You mentioned that your company does research. Tell us a little bit more about what the company does.
Yeah,
and who it serves.
Yeah. We only serve B2B technology companies. So we sometimes, a good way to think of that, I guess, would be all the technology that is not sold in a Best Buy. I used to ask that as an interview question, and sometimes people would be like, I don't know one. And I'm like, well, you can't work here, but you're a great person. So it's all what, businesses buy when they get technologies, whether it's a bank or a fintech or a healthcare organization or a educational or just your average business that just needs to buy a lot of technology to run, back office systems and things like that. And so we work with the companies that basically supply those technologies and or the organizations that are the service providers who help implement those technologies. So those are basically our two audiences. And then for those audiences, we really help with two things. We help people position themselves effectively, and we help folks message effectively through research and through some activation of that research that we do. And that's basically who we are. So if you're in B2B tech and you're struggling to position yourself against the competitive landscape or the market, or if you're having trouble saying the right things to the right people, having effective messaging, that's where we can help. And we're kind of research first. So most projects tend to start with some research component where we're talking to competitor customers or prospects or your customers or partners in an effort to really understand what you can meaningfully impact out there. And then from there, we carried on into kind of helping you activate a lot of those things and developing assets and the like. And that's basically who Cascade is. We're about a dozen or so people. I started out in Portland, so I'm based in Oregon City. That's where I've lived for about 20 years in Oregon. But right now, we've only got 3 or so people on the team that are based in Oregon as people kind of moved and spread out over the years. And we also hired from other places too. So we've pretty much got people in every time zone in the US at this point.
Okay. So I am a big fan of good messaging. And so I wanted to ask you, because I think that a lot of companies don't do the upfront research that needs to be done in order to create good messaging. Would you say that's the case? I mean, your clients come to you because they want you to do that upfront?
Yeah, I mean, here's an interesting thing, especially on a podcast entitled Salesology. So on one hand, there's an aspect of sales interaction that doesn't happen, and I'll get back to that. But to answer the direct question, and I know to somebody listening, this probably sounds slightly self-serving, and even me saying that sounds self-serving, but you got to trust me on this. Yes, it is way too much internal tribal knowledge. There's way too much. We all sat around a room. We went to a whiteboard. We told ourselves we were good writers or smart people. And maybe you were on both points. But if you don't test it with the external market, you have no ability to know if it's going to resonate. Which is particularly painful with, digital marketing, right? Because you tell yourself you wrote all this wonderful messaging and you put it up on the website and then nobody comes and nobody fills out the lead form. It's such a waste, right? I mean, a minimal amount of testing relative to the overall opportunity cost that you lost and the lost leads and the lost engagement, just a minor amount of testing goes a really, really long way. And everybody learns from it because we all know that ultimately it's just the way it is. Our clients, our prospects, competitor customers, they're not always super clear with us if we're the vendor, if we're the supplier of the solution, right? They're not always quite as direct on their feedback as you'd like. And on top of that, even if it's beyond just getting clear and honest feedback, there's also a little bit of just partnering with somebody who kind of knows the space you're in. So we can dig pretty deep with people and figure out okay, what's really going to drive them to engage with you beyond it just being cheaper, beyond it just having everything they'd ever want, because sometimes efforts like that stop too soon, right? You can uncover some fairly surface level things about any market in about 6 seconds, right? They'd like it cheaper. They'd like it to do everything they'd ever wanted. And they'd like you to be around forever with the world's best customer service possible. Okay. Not everybody has that option or any of those options, right? I mean, owning a business is to some extent a continual mixture of trying to create new opportunities and optimize at the same time. And so, it depends on what stage you're at. So yes, I think people do that. On the second piece of that really quick though, I think the biggest gap I see, and I've said this on interview after interview over the years, and I've said it to clients for decades, the biggest gap in B2B companies is B2B salespeople. And I said salespeople specifically instead of sales leaders. B2B salespeople are not invited to discuss what the messaging should look like. And here's why that happens. Because there is a little bit of a chip on the shoulder when marketing and sales get in the room, because they're different animals. And I'm not going to go deep down that road because that part's been covered, but I just want to hit one point of it. Marketing will tend to look at a problem slightly more distantly, and the tools that we use are more analytical tools commingled with creative kind of assets and processes. Sales is sitting there talking to people all day. Now, in a B2C environment, those conversations are somewhat transactional. They are not necessarily deeply rooted in needs and desires, right? The proverbial blue polo at Best Buy is not spending a lot of time asking you why you want a laptop. Now, when you buy complex B2B purchases, though, and the funnel lasts 6 months, 9 months, a year, 18 months, that seller is having lots and lots and lots and lots of conversations with lots and lots and lots of mid to senior level people. And if they are being successful, here's what they're doing. They're messaging. That's what they're doing. And they're also hearing competitor messaging filtered through the mouth and ears of the people they're talking to. And they know what resonates and they know what doesn't. Now, maybe they've got a little too much of a shine on it. Maybe it's a little too colloquial. Maybe it's just not quite as snappy as somebody would like. Or maybe it's too direct. I mean, salespeople have been known to be that way for decades. But that doesn't mean that's not an incredible source of intel. So one of the very first things we do when we run a messaging workshop or we're having those conversations, we're like, where is sales? And the funny thing is they're hardly ever invited unless we ask. And I think it's just this chip on the shoulder that people have, even if they know it not to be true. And sometimes I don't know if they know it not to be true, that 18 months of conversations or even 3 months of conversations over multiple phone calls must mean you know how to message. And so to ignore that input, especially from seasoned sellers, right, who can pretty much tell you exactly the phrases that move a conversation along, right, And these aren't like salesy phrases. These are phrases about your product or about the competitive market or about capabilities or about buyer needs. To just ignore those and try to create them on your own when you, the marketer, have never actually met a prospect, I think that's just crazy. But it happens all the time, all the time.
So is part of your process a step back from inviting the salespeople in, which I think is a great idea? Part of your process, though, is also talking to clients, to prospects, because
Absolutely.
that's one of the things that we do in our training programs, because we teach prospecting, and we have the people that are in our classes interview their clients and go through a series of questions to ask them to find out what are the challenges that these type of prospects have that will get them to say, yeah, I'm willing to set up a meeting with you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's all of that I would agree with. I mean, basically, if you sum it up, I think, and we don't have to spend a ton of time here unless you want to, I think B2B sales, you could write 1 trillion books about it. And there have been 1 trillion books about it. But everyone seems to walk into it with this presupposition that we're still Glenn Glary, Glenn Ross, where it's like the winner gets a car, second place gets steaks, knives, and third place is gone. And it's not like I don't understand that world. My father worked in that side of the business. He sold small group health insurance to small business owners, cold called on Monday morning to get his leads, was 100% commission, no salary for his entire life. And that's a hard way to go. Okay. But I saw that every day. I know what that looks like. I'm not saying I did his job, but I'm saying like you do as a son, pick up a few things watching your dad. Right. And so like, it's just interesting that bias is so there, and I think it's just the hugest gap all the time. And every time we do it, marketers are like, oh, that is a good phrase. Huh. That's a good thing. Never thought of that before. Right. Or sales will tell you when a phrase is tired. We did a workshop one time for a Fortune 100-ish company, and they were trying to reset their messaging for something. And some sellers were involved. And one of the marketers says, well, I think we should still focus on a phrase, like digital transformation. Now, if anybody's been in tech for long enough, that phrase is so tired right now. And he was tired even when it was brought up in this meeting. And there's a million ways you could have addressed the tiredness of it, but it was so much better for one of the senior sellers to say, and he just broke in without even missing a beat. I just want to say there should be a swear jar around here for every time somebody in this company says digital transformation to a prospect, and we need to pay into it. And like, you can't, what are you going to say to that? Right? That is like a never ending qualitative research project that seller is having. And I know some people might hear that and bristle at it. Well, it's not rigorous and whatever. I'm like, well, yes, I'm not saying it's exactly like a qualitative research project. I'm saying it's similar. You're having all these interactions and you're adjusting your behaviors based on it. And I just think it's the easiest thing to do. If people had one piece of homework, the next time you go build the messaging for your company, bring your sellers who are talking to customers. Don't bring your VP of sales who hasn't talked to a customer in 3 years. Don't do that. Bring somebody who's like just a killer, who's doing a really good job building long-term relationships, and they know what to say to win deals that are multi-month deal cycles. That person is gold for helping to build a good messaging.
And I'll also add that marketing is just not the same as selling, because written copy is completely different from a human being talking. And there are things that
I would say, here's the thing. It is and it isn't. In other words, yes, it's different. 100% agree. And I give you a good example of that, a short vignette about work from home that I love telling. So I'll just bring that up in a minute. But it's completely different. But whatever is that DNA, that genetic striping in whatever the seller is saying, you can extract that and put it into written copy. Like it might look a little different and the phrasing might be a little different and the pattern might be a little different. But inside that phrase is something that prospect is really resonating with, right? And yes, it needs to be converted from the verbal to the written. But anybody who knows how to write well knows how to do that, right? Because a lot of writing of anything in depth requires interviewing people as sources, right? And so that's a normal paradigm. That's not a hard deal to figure out.
That's not the problem. The problem
Right.
is not converting the spoken into the marketing language. The problem is taking the marketing language and giving it to salespeople and expecting them to use it as is.
Oh, right. That's another side of the problem for sure.
That is the problem.
Well, and the part where I bring up the thing about the verbal to the written, I'm partly colored. I remember this is more about remote work versus non-remote work. I remember, so this is maybe changing gears slightly, so we can get off this if you want in a minute. But I love telling this story about just the difference between verbal and written communication, and the importance of being good at both. Is that a client was talking to me kind of at the start of COVID when everybody was sent home. Generally speaking, a lot of workers were sent home. And the guy said to me, and he didn't mean it mean-spiritedly, but he said, I had no idea how dumb some of my colleagues were until they had to write me an email to convince me to do things. And his point was that when you took away the ability in the office to shuffle over and say, hey, Bob, I was wondering about that thing that we were talking about the other day, where your brain instantly just ignores all that crud Bob said for 3 seconds when he finally starts saying something meaningful. But that looks horrible when you write. I think one of the things that what we've gone through, let's put it that way, with people going, out of the office to work from home offices, is it's really exposed the people who can write and speak on the sales side. Because so much of it ended up getting translated into written communication, both internal and external. And I think it's one of the skills that doesn't get talked about that much when people work remote. I mean, if you're going to work remote, you really need to become a better writer. If you're going to sell remote, you need to become a better writer. If you're going to do anything remote, you need to be a better writer. And I could almost say that maybe when we're done analyzing this great sociological experiment that we've done, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I've joked for a couple of years now, the number of PhD sociology degrees that are going to be created off COVID and work from home is like astronomical. But at the end of the day, this experiment that we've ran, I think one of the things we'll find is that those who were able to write as well as they speak succeeded when they went home to work. And those that maybe were more deficient in that way found it harder to do that. And I think that client was dead on about that. And so that's one of the things I always think about when we talk about this duality, because usually people will say, I'm good at one and I'm not good at the other. And I would say, if you're past the age of 30, you better get good at both. I mean, you can use that excuse when you're under 30, but after 30, it's no longer your high school teacher that's the problem. It was you, right? Yes. You've decided to not get good at it at that point.
Agreed. And we are going to pause now for a word from our sponsor. And then when we come back, Sean, I want to ask you some more questions about working remotely and the difference between communication, working remotely versus working all together in one nice office. Now a word from our sponsor, the Salesology Vault. Just about every guest that I've interviewed on the Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders podcast has had a free gift for our listeners. So what we've done is we've taken all of those gifts and we put them all in one place just for you. We call it the Salesology Vault, and it is packed full of free gifts from sales leaders, sales experts, marketing gurus, revenue generation experts. And we add another gift every single week. We release a podcast and then we add a gift. And you can log in as often as you'd like and download as many gifts as you'd like. And it's all free. So go to bit.ly/gift vault, or the link to the Salesology Vault is in the show notes. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the notes, click on the link, download your gift. You'll be glad you did. And we are back with my special guest, Sean Campbell, who is the founder and CEO of Cascade Insight. And I know, Sean, you have a lot of experience working remotely with teams that are working remotely, even before COVID. So what would you say is the biggest challenge, and how do you overcome that challenge in helping teams, the people on your team, be effective at communicating when nobody's in the same place?
Yeah. Well, at one point, I want to get to some of the excuses people have for communicating poorly, or why it doesn't work, but we can get to that in a minute. But as far as the biggest thing, I think that's a game changer, it's building a culture where it is completely, utterly safe to communicate your ignorance about a subject. And I didn't say to be ignorant, right? I mean, there's a difference. Because what happens, I believe, in remote environments is people who do not feel safe enough to talk to their boss, their grand boss, an owner, a peer, about their inability to progress, whatever that is at the moment, right? Finish off a proposal, identify an opportunity, decide a prospecting strategy, review an email sequence, just to give some sales examples. We could give other ones too. What happens is just the clock starts running in the corner while they're trying to do it without interrupting someone, bothering someone, showing that they don't understand. And in an office setting, we built up a set of mores and ways of relating that make that a little bit easier, right? You kind of like, hey, do you have a minute? I just kind of want to ask, but there's this little hill you got to get over remote. You actually have to pick up the phone. You have to Slack someone. You have to then, ask for a time to talk, or you have to do that. Now, most of this doesn't require a meeting that's scheduled. So if somebody heard that, it's like, well, see, like it's going to take 2 days to schedule a meeting. No. That's a different thing. I mean, a lot of times you can have ad hoc conversations just like you could have in the office. If the time existed to have them in the office, the time probably even exists even more when you're at home because there's less distractions. So it's that people just don't jump over that little hill. And I think the reason they don't in most cases is they haven't been given the air cover from the organization to say, hey, if I 5 times today say I don't know what to do next, and I reach out and call someone, that's okay. Because in the office, that would be fine, right? If 3 or 4 times during the day you wander over somebody's desk and you say, well, what about this thing? And it's that what about this thing interaction that you have to allow. And I think that comes from the top, because if you don't do it from the top, people will think it's kind of unsafe. They'll think that you're almost like keeping track of the number of times you say, I don't know how to do something. And I tell people, I don't keep track of that at all. And nobody around here does. What we do keep track of is the number of hours you maybe spent wasted without talking to somebody when you could have. And I think once you break that down, that is like the biggest thing. I mean, the written communication is big. There's other things I could get to, but if I really could say 2 things, make people better writers and hold them accountable for that. They write you a crappy looking email and it doesn't make sense and it takes you 10 seconds to parse it more than it should have. Train your people how to write communication that is clear, and train your people to know when just sitting alone isn't the right answer. They need to go get somebody. And again, it's a little bigger hill to jump over when you're remote, but train them that that's okay, right? And then show them that it's okay. Because when they come and interrupt you as a leader or a manager or a boss or whatever, you have to be like, yeah, totally. Exactly. Just like if we were in the office, I need to get interrupted. So those are the 2 big things. And then we could get into more things that I think are productive, or I could even tell you the things that I feel are red herrings. Because I just saw a post.
I want to hear the red herrings.
Yeah.
I want to hear the red herrings and excuses.
I read this post the other day, and it was called "The Future of Remote Work" by a blogger that, if somebody wants to look it up, they could probably find it by that. But it's not about the blogger itself. The blogger's written some good stuff. But at one point at the top of the article, and I'm quoting from it, the guy says, people generally naturally gravitate toward either getting things done or not getting things done. And remote work allows them to become the fullest versions of themselves. So he says, now you got this separation. You got driven, independent, highly motivated killers. That's the way I would think about it. It's the way he wrote it, who form the backbone of your company. They tackle new work, make things happen independently. Don't distract them. They'll get as much done as if you don't breathe down their necks or throw them off their game. Then the other one, people want to hang out, rest, invest, quiet, quit their time through their careers, right? These people are an anchor that your team has to drag around, If you think they're napping, that's because they are. But then he tries to make this argument that I've heard so weakly made over and over again, that but we kind of have to be back in the office to be good. Like if we were back in the office, it would be good. And the first thing I would tell people is be careful who says that to you. Like a lot of times that's being said by the CEO of a company who's got office leases that extend out into infinity. And they're terrified that they're going to have to go talk to a financial officer and say, why is nobody in the building? And we can't get anybody to go back to the building because they're all ready to quit to go work for some organization that's hybrid or remote. So don't forget about like internal motivations when you're told like the only way for us to be productive is to go back to the office. And so this guy says, remote work makes it harder to make fast, difficult decisions. The core of decision making for all of human history has been small groups hashing stuff out face to face. Completely bogus. I mean, like on top of that, when you're in the office, you got to wait for a conference room to become available. Wonder if everybody's in the building today. When you're remote, you just message and you talk. And on top of it, there's plenty of times where difficult, challenging decisions have been made remotely. Roosevelt and Churchill, two people that I'm sure the listeners know, have only met 11 times during the course of all of World War II while they were fighting a global conflict, but they did exchange 2,000 plus letters. So you can get meaningful strategy done without having to meet all the time. Now, and to be clear, I'm not an advocate for like never ever meet. Like we have a yearly offsite. We sometimes have a couple other ways that we might meet up in smaller local groups. But I'm a big advocate for the fact that, those meetings, when we do have them, those are really just team building. Like they're PowerPoint free things. We just did our retreat down in Central Oregon, brought everybody in. I had a PowerPoint Insight. This is all about building a team culturally. It's not about like trying to have a bunch of PowerPoint sessions offsite. And we get all of our strategy work done remotely, and it's just fine. Another red herring, this I've seen multiple places, but it came up in this article too, is like, although this guy had a great way of saying it, he says, Zoom is a low pass filter on positive emotion. And his argument was like, well, see, it's Zoom. It's like, it's like all this flat 2D video and it's not the same. And I'm like, hold on a minute. Is YouTube engaging? I think YouTube's pretty engaging. I don't think people watch it in 3D. Most of the time, it's just one person talking. It isn't even two people talking or 10 people talking. So the issue there is a different thing. That's actually getting people to use these technologies in an effective way and in right ways and with good audio and good video and engaging and not checking out in there. I mean, there's a million things there, but it's not about just Zoom itself. And so I just think there's a lot of things that are thrown out there as kind of red herrings. Even the whole thing about like esprit de corps and building up a culture and everybody's together because we're all in the same building, breathing the same air. It's like we have hundreds or thousands of years of civilized history where teams, relationships were built off exchanging letters for decades sometimes. I don't think physical proximity is as strong as people make it out to be. What you're really missing is, whether it's over the phone or it's a written communication or it's email, is its humanity. If you can express your humanity and you can do so in meaningful ways and clear ways through those means of communication, like we have done for millennia, long before we had Zoom, long before we had conference tables and chairs and whiteboards and all the rest, stuff can get done. So, and if I sound a little passionate about it, I am, because I feel like we're throwing out all of the amazing things that we get from work from home because of this really kind of ugly thing that isn't, in my mind, real, that productivity is in the office. And I would just say, look real closely at who's telling you about that and what their own vested interests are in getting you to go back to the office. And I would think about that long and hard before I did that. That'd be my advice. So, and if that was a little preachy, I feel that way about it. So we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and we will forgive you for being a little bit preachy. It is okay. But thank you. This has been a great conversation. If people want to get in touch with you, people want to continue the conversation with you, how can they do that? Where can they find you?
You can just email me at Sean, SEAN, at cascadeinsights.com. And if you go to cascadeinsights.com, you'll see the team and me, and you can fill out the form. If you don't remember the email and you just fill in the form, hey, I wanted to chat with Sean, that's fine too. I'm always happy to talk to people who are just trying to figure out how to run their business. I don't get remuneration from that. That's just me just trying to pay it back from being around for a long time. But obviously, if you're a B2B technology company and you're interested in being better positioned or developing better messaging, definitely give us a call.
Okay. And good news, no one has to remember Sean's email address because we're going to post it in the show notes along
Excellent.
with the website and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. So it's all going to be in the show notes. As soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on all the links, and reach out to Sean. And you have been listening to Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders with my special guest, Sean Campbell, who is the founder and CEO of Cascade Insight. And if you have found value in listening to today's podcast, then please think about one business leader, one sales leader, one business owner, sales professional that you think might also find value in listening to the podcast, and please do share the link with them. And until we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.